مساء الخير, عرف طوب, good afternoon, et bon après-midi. اليوم سنخلد ذكرى ابن يافا البار الطبيب البارع الدكتور فؤاد إسماعيل الدجاني مؤسس مستشفى الدجاني.
On the 25th of February 2012, myself and 20 members of my family returned to our homeland in order to attend the ceremony held by the state to commemorate my late grandfather, Dr. Fouad Dajani. For many, including myself, it was a first trip to Palestine, a land that we had heard so much about via beautiful nostalgic stories from our parents, yet had never visited. On a personal note, this was the moment I'd been waiting for my entire adult life. I was finally going home. I was really excited that morning we left the house in Amman. Basically, I'd wanted to finally see this land that I'd heard so much about from my family via these beautiful and nostalgic stories. And it was also to put to rest the kind of identity crisis that I'd had throughout my life. I'd never been home, and not many people can say that in their mid-30s. On the other hand, my mum was pretty apprehensive, let's say. She hadn't been back home in decades because she finds the whole thing far too painful. So we crossed the bridge from Amman, and I really didn't know what to expect. It was a pretty gloomy day. The first sight of this Israeli soldier at the border was a shock to the system. I knew it was coming, but it was the first of many emotional highs and lows of the trip. It took us about an hour to get into Jerusalem, and we checked in immediately at the hotel, and we decided to go straight to the Aqsa Mosque for Friday press. The weather was pretty horrible. It was light rain and very gloomy. As we walked towards the Al-Aqsa complex, I began to feel really apprehensive. There was this very tense feeling in the air. And then we were warned by countless people that there could be trouble, given settlers had been antagonizing worshippers in the area over the last few days. I mean, Jerusalem is a very tense city at the best of times, but this was on another level. Catching that first glimpse of the golden dome of the rock was something unforgettable. The place is simply awe-inspiring. It was really packed, so we had to pray outside the Aqsa Mosque. It was a beautiful and humbling experience. And then we saw crowds gathering around this guy who was speaking loudly. We initially thought nothing of it, and it wasn't in any way violent or sinister. Not long after, though, we started hearing explosions. The Israeli riot police had stormed the complex. They started firing tear gas canisters and rubber bullets indiscriminately. It was completely unprovoked. And then we started to retreat, me and my brother carrying my aunt by each of our arms. But we found ourselves in between some Palestinian youths who were throwing rocks now and the Israeli riot police. So we were effectively now on the front line. And then all of a sudden my niece shouts out an expletive and my heart sinks. I said, "What's wrong, Dee?" "I just got hit," she said. "What do you mean hit?" He said, "Don't worry, I'm okay, it was a rubber bullet." "Ah, that's great," I thought. 2 hours into our trip and my niece gets shot. At this point, I just wanted to get out now. We ran past a group of soldiers who were beating the hell out of a young Palestinian man. Felt so sad and helpless. So then we turned a few corners and found life going on as normal, as if nothing was going on at all. And this was just a few yards away from all the clashes by the Al-Aqsa. The souk was bustling, traders were going on about their normal business. So we asked a few locals, about these clashes, and they were like, "Oh, this is completely normal." And I'm like, "Normal?" I was traumatized by this whole thing, and these guys were thinking it was normal. And I just thought, how sad is that? And then we started walking around the souk in the old city, and we were immediately struck by the warmth of these people. The mere mention of our surname, and we were treated like family. "I knew your great uncle," or "I knew your great aunt." So my first bout of nostalgia hit me as we were walking around. And my mind started to wander back as to how life must have been all those years ago, when there was a cohesive and harmonious society, and we were a majority in our own country. Along the old city, we saw stolen settler houses on the high ground and Israeli soldiers dotted around the place, armed to the teeth. The signs of occupation here are evident almost everywhere. The locals, though, are so used to it. They just get on with their lives. What else can they do? What you quickly notice is their unwavering strength and resilience, a resolute belief that they will prevail one day. It's hard to describe. It's almost like they were telling us, "Don't worry about us, we will be fine." We then made our way to where it all began for the Dajanis in Palestine, our ancestral home, the Nabi Dawood quarter of Jerusalem. Nabi Dawood is located on the Mount of Prophet David, south of Jerusalem's old city wall, just several hundred meters from the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was the year 1190 when the first Dajanis came to settle in Palestine, arriving in ships from Fez in Morocco to fight for Salah ad-Din's victorious army against the Crusaders. In the year 1529, the family were entrusted as custodians of Prophet David's tomb and the site of the Last Supper of Jesus Christ in the Nabi Dawood area by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent.
The majority of the Dajani houses have been demolished, as we'll see later.
Demolished?
Okay. But you'll see there's one here, and there's a couple.
This is a
further
Dajani
down.
house?
Must be. They were living all around.
This was all Dajani houses around this area.
This is the tomb of David.
This is the tomb. This is where the Dajani flag was on top of this.
Well, who has the Dajani flag?
We have a copy of it in Tunis. It's a green flag with Islamic. This is where we're from. Even here, whenever we had pilgrims coming in Nabi Dawood, we used to look after the pilgrims, we used to house them, we used to feed them. This is the essence of the Dajani family, just here where we stand.
This is what? Okay, so this is the Last Supper location. The family lived in a conglomeration of houses and apartments around the tomb and owned most of the property in the area for well over 4 centuries, until they fled in 1948 amidst rumours of Jewish massacres in the country. In 1967, most of the family houses were either demolished or converted to Jewish yeshivas or religious schools. The centuries-old family cemetery remains to this day in the heart of the quarter, despite numerous attempts by members of the yeshiva to desecrate the graves and generally remove any signs of previous Arab life.
This whole area, the Dajanis were entrusted.
Yeah.
And they were entrusted for 600, 700, 800 years. In the car park down there, which we'll go to, that was where all the Dajani houses were. And there's still some standing, one of which is my grandfather's.
So this is all Dajani tombs?
These are all Dajani tombs. I don't know when but you can't bury your dead here now. They haven't allowed it, they've allowed it just to keep it. And about 7 or 8 years ago, there's the yeshiva next door, came in and desecrated a number of graves, and then at the time Baba made a big stink and so on.
هذا قبل مدفون. فشوف انت هلا هذا السور كان لهناك. هلا كل خمتهم شبوها وضموا هون. كان السور هذا هيك لهناك. هون في قبور كسرت. إذا بتطلع هون بتلاقي أناني خمرة. شوف الأناني. شوف شو بيسوي يعني. هذه ترجمتها الموت للعرب. مافت للعربي.
To the Arabs.
Yes.
When we were walking around the graveyard, that was really the moment where I felt the connection with this land. These were the graves of my forefathers and my ancestors before them. So it was the most tangible moment in terms of feeling and connection to the land. The next day we set off for Ramle, the hometown of my mother's family, the Taji-Faroukis, in search of my great-grandfather's house. Ramle lies at the intersection of the roads connecting the port of Yafa with Jerusalem and along the old route which connected Cairo with Damascus. Under Arab and Ottoman rule, the city became an important trading hub and major commercial center in Palestine. My great-grandfather, AbdulRahman Taji, was born in Ramle around 1865, the only son of Hamid Taji, a large landowner at the time. Hard-working from a young age, AbdulRahman took a keen interest in his father's business of cultivating land and selling oranges. By age 14, he bought his first piece of land in Ramle, and following the death of his father several years later, AbdulRahman began to export his produce to Europe. With the increased profits, he bought more and more land in the area. In 1920, he built his mansion in the village of Wadi Hnain in western Ramle.
في كان 6 أوض 3 هيك و3 هيك والنص اللي هو 16 متر اللي هو كان أوضة السفرة والقعدة وبعدين عمل أوضة مكتب بأول دخلة البيت يعني. بعدين البراكين حوالي البيت كله وفي 11 أوضة نوم 5 تحت و6 فوق غير الصالونات فوق غير يعني صالونات فوق صالونات تحت.
His cousin Shukri built an almost identical one on top of the opposing hill. In between them, nothing but orange groves and olive trees. It was meant to be a paradise.
يعني أحلى من القعدة كانت في وادي حنين، ما في منظرها كلها. يعني بقول إذا الرهبات كانوا يموتوا عليها، يقولون إحنا بدنا نيجي نشوف التلفزيون. كان أي واحد من الكبار يجي يضيف، إن كان إنجليزي أو أجنبي أو عربي، كلهم يقولوا لازم تروحوا تزوروا وادي حنين. يجوا لأبوه يقولوا له إيش يا عبد الرحمن؟ يقول لهم أهلا وسهلا، إيش بده يقول؟ مسكين يقعد يحتار، يقول هذول طب لهم إنجليزي، إيش بدي أدرديهم؟ ما بعرفش إيش بدي أطعنهم. يعني بقول لك كان فاتح صدره للكل.
After becoming a member of the Supreme Islamic Council which ruled Palestine during the British Mandate period, AbdulRahman often played host to dignitaries from abroad who were visiting the country.
فيش واحد كبير إن كان أمير أو أميرة أو أي شيء من يحكوا مع أبوي يقولوا معلش نجيبوا على الاثنين، إحنا بنحب نعرفهم على
زي مين يعني؟
أمراء من إنجلترا كلهم، وبعدين الأميرة ماري أجت كمان، كلهم أجوا كلهم. بعدين غير الأمراء هذول الأمراء العرب مثلهم مثل الأمير فيصل والملك فيصل كانوا كلهم إخوة وإخوته كلهم. لما يجوا بالبرة يجوا بالبحر، ما فيش طيارات كان، يجوا بالبحر ينزلوا عند أبوي، يناموا بالليل عند أبوي، تاني يوم يروحوا على يافا يستقبلوه، يجوا يناموا ليلة يرتاحوا، وبعدين يروحوا على العراق.
As more and more European Jews entered the country in the late 1930s, AbdulRahman was quoted as saying that this land will not be for us if Germany loses the war. He became proactive and decided to buy 3 farms, as well as a residential building, a cinema and a cemetery in Cairo in case of disaster. He never though sold an inch of his land in Palestine.
كنا احنا وياهم صحبة كتير، نزورهم يزورونا، وكانوا يعدوا حالهم عرب، يقولوا احنا عرب، احنا فلسطينيين. حتى في غزة كانوا يقولوا سألله على حياتنا في احنا في فلسطين، احنا مش عايشين يعني مبسوطين في اسرائيل، احنا بفلسطين كنا معززين مكرمين اكثر، لانه ما كانوش عندهم درجة اولى. اللي طلعوا من فلسطين كلهم عندهم درجة ثالثة ورابعة.
These investments, it turned out, saved future generations of Tajis from the refugee camps, because in July 1948, after days of aerial bombardment and terror by the Irgun on the ground, Ramle surrendered to the Zionist invaders. David Ben-Gurion ordered his armies to cleanse the entire city of all its Arab inhabitants due to its strategic importance.
بعدين لما جابوا لنا الجيش كله مأمل، كله مش عارف حاله انه جاي يقاتل يهود، يعني ما حدا من العرب رفضنا ولا حدا، كلهم والسلاح اللي اجانا كلهم خربان مش نافع. السلاح الفاسد هذه كانت قصة طويلة علينا انفضحوا فيها.
The city's 15,000 Arab population left their homes and began walking east in the sweltering summer heat. They were given 2 hours to leave their homes, so many literally took nothing with them apart from the keys to their houses. Hundreds died on the way. Only 500 Arabs remained after Ramle's cleansing, with Jewish immigrants fresh off the boat, simply moving into the evacuated houses. AbdulRahman's house was looted of all its belongings. Only the grand piano, which my great aunt used to play on, remained, given it was too heavy to lift. It actually remains to this day.
قبل ما طلعنا والله رمونا أكثر من 3-4 ساعات لما شوفونا بصات يهود ركبونا، وبعدين رمونا قالوا لنا روحوا لملككم. والله ما حملت شيء ثاني معي، على أساس إنه الملك واحد حماي، بعد 3 أيام ترجع على الرملة وباجوا يتغدى عندي. لما طلعنا احنا أكلناها، إيش يعني قبل ما إحنا في الصحراء ماشيين، فيشي وكلها شوك، واطلعي وانزلي وكله شوك، يعني مش طريق تمشي فيها طريق عادي، لا الطريق كانوا يضربوا علينا، واحنا طالعين مهاجرين كانوا يضربوا علينا.
We can only be thankful that AbdulRahman never witnessed the catastrophe, as he passed away in his home just 3 years earlier in 1945. Our venture to see the mansion was unsurprisingly in vain. We were not allowed in as the house is now an Israeli hospital for the mentally ill. The closest we could get was the car park.
I remember that it was a beautiful place. That's it. One of the most beautiful houses in Palestine.
We then made the short hop to Shukri Taji's house, and this time we could only get a view of it from several hundred yards away. His house is now an Israeli biological research center. Being refused to go into my great-grandfather's house was probably the most painful part of the trip. I mean, this was our property, and there was a guard at the house. He must have been some European or Russian or so on. And here he was telling us that we couldn't go into our own house. And that was extremely painful, especially my mother and aunt were there. And to see the look on their faces was just devastating for me. The next day we headed up to the north of the country, to Haifa, Akka and Tabariya. We were warned beforehand that this part of the country was the prettiest, and they weren't wrong. The journey to Haifa took around 2 hours, and the scenery was simply stunning on the way. Endless greenery on both sides of the motorway, vast expanses of forests, banana plantations, orange groves and olive trees. Simply breathtaking. I remember it was a beautiful, crisp summer morning. The view of the Mediterranean and the Baha'i gardens from the top of Mount Carmel was just indescribable. It was painfully beautiful. On to Akka, a charming old port town dotted with old mosques and Arab souks. The town, though, like many others in the country, is now 80% Jewish. Akka is another jewel, again right on the Mediterranean Sea. There we took a boat ride just to get a better view of the town. But as with everywhere in the country, there's always this reminder of the occupation, of the injustice of it all. There we saw this group of Israeli teenagers just walking around town with machine guns. And of course no one can say anything and no one can do anything about it. We then proceeded east to Tabariya. The road to Tabariya had some of the most beautiful scenery I'd ever witnessed. The further we drove, the more beautiful it got and the more silent the car became. Everybody was just in awe at what they were seeing.
فوق الجولان.
الجولان هناك الجبال بيض هذا ثلج. هذه هضبة الجولان.
Tabariya or Tiberias is a charming little town located on the banks of the Sea of Galilee, with a magnificent backdrop of the snow-capped Golan Heights occupied from Syria. The sense of loss was at its worst here, and my sense of guilt about putting my mum through all of this was overbearing, as this was where she spent several years of her childhood. There we decided to make our way to the baptism site, where some Christians believe Jesus was baptized. Walking to the water's edge, it felt so surreal. Everyone was dressed in these white sheets, walking around, some groups singing hymns with the odd cheer in the background as another person gets rebaptized. I just thought this is the core of the problem right here. Many of these people were from this belt of right-wing US Zionist Christians who, regardless of what Israel does and regardless of their crimes, just won't have a bad word said against them. And meanwhile, the Israelis are capitalizing on this group of people, both financially and politically, given their pull within the US political system. The next day, we made our way to Yafa in order to attend the ceremony held by the state in honor of my late grandfather, Dr. Fouad Dajani. The port city, nicknamed the Bridesmaid of the Sea, was the most advanced city in pre-1948 Palestine due to its thriving commercial, banking, fishing and agricultural industries. One of 6 siblings, Dr. Fouad Dajani was born in Jerusalem in 1890. A large part of his upbringing, though, was spent in Gaza, where his father, Ismail Dajani, was district commissioner there. A pioneer in every sense of the word, Dr. Fouad became the first Palestinian to obtain the prestigious FRCS, a medical diploma from London. He then moved to Yafa, and in 1933 he built the country's first private hospital. Echoing the spirit of cooperation at the time, the hospital was designed by a Jewish architect, and Dr. Fouad also employed Jewish and Arab doctors and nurses alike. The only criteria was that they spoke Arabic. On the same grounds of the hospital, he built the family home where he lived with his wife Fayah Hosseini and their 6 children. By all accounts, it was a beautiful life. Dr. Fouad was a deeply compassionate man and became widely known for treating the needy for free, regardless of race or background. So much so that the municipality of Yafa renamed the street outside his hospital in his honor. He was even awarded an MBE by Her Majesty's government in honor of his work treating British Mandate soldiers. He later returned the medal in protest at British policy in Palestine, which he believed was becoming increasingly pro-Zionist. On the 24th of June 1940, tragedy struck when Dr. Fouad contracted a blood disease from a simple cut whilst treating a patient. Without penicillin at the time, he was faced with the agonizing choice of amputation or certain death. He refused the amputation and died shortly afterwards. Dr. Fouad was buried in the grounds of the hospital, right in front of the house, at the age of just 50. His wife was left utterly devastated. His death was met with extreme shock around the country, as can be seen in a write-up the day after his funeral in the most widely read paper of the time, the Palestine Post. Prominent Christians, Jews and Muslims from all parts of the country attended the funeral held from the deceased's home adjoining the hospital. Arab women watching from balconies and from behind windows openly showed their grief at the passing of the popular physician, while many men were also unable to restrain their emotions. The speakers declared that the death of the surgeon was an irreparable loss to the Muslim community. Dr. Dajani's labours sprang only from humanitarian impulses, as he was a rich man. The speakers recalled his generosity to the poor, whom he had treated free of charge in his clinic. The first clause in his will, written 5 hours before his death, made provisions for the poor. The next trauma for the family came, of course, in April 1948, when sustained terror attacks by the Irgun and Haganah created mass panic amongst the Arabs of Yafa. The majority of the city's 50,000 fled in panic. Most took boats to Gaza or Egypt. Some made it all the way to Beirut.
My mother chose to take us all to Cairo, stay in a hotel for maybe 2 weeks, not more, because there was she could hear bumping and some things going on which scared her somehow, and at the same time she had young children, and which is something that she thought it's best for us to be out of for a short while until everything calms down and we'll go back to our home. And it was meant to be for 2 weeks, but it was unfortunately, how many years since then? 48, 60 years.
Not long after the conquest of Yafa, the Zionists gradually began to change all the Arabic street names to Jewish ones. Dr. Fouad Dajani Street became Dr. Ehrlich Street, and to add insult to injury, the name of the hospital eventually became the Zahalon Geriatric Center. On the day of the ceremony, the family all congregated beforehand at the Dajani hospital on what was a deeply emotional day. Seeing the house and the grounds where my grandfather is buried and where my father used to play was something I'll never forget. The place instantly felt like home. This is my uncle, Uncle Omar.
لا when I left I was 7.5. Okay? This I do remember. When we were leaving, the valuables were placed there and it was cemented over. And this was, in case while we're away. Okay? I remember the main dining room and the salon were around there. Okay?
By the way,
really?
Yeah, this is the hospital.
No, this is the that's the house here. This is the house.
You see those trees?
Yes,
it's those trees.
Oh wow!
Would
My
you
God!
believe
My
that?
God! My God! These are what they are now.
Those look like a year old or something like this.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And the house itself, by the way, it was 1933, and it looks like a modern house.
Yeah, it does. It's very modern.
It's called international style.
Yes.
And it was affected by the Bauhaus. You know what the Bauhaus?
Yeah.
Bauhaus is a style, German movement.
This is it. This is the house. This is the.
This is my grandfather's grave. We then made our way to the ceremony. There we were greeted by many local Yafa residents, many of whom were recounting stories of my grandfather, which was really heartwarming. A group of young Israeli and Arab men and women who were part of Zochrot, a group who are trying to raise awareness of the Nakba within the country, also attended. They restored what little faith I had that there are some Israelis out there, however small in number, that realize what an injustice 1948 was, and are trying to work towards a solution that is equitable and just for all sides. I just wish we had more like them.
There are coming more friends now with signs to welcome you and to wish the return of all refugees.
A Jewish former schoolmate of my aunt, Salma Dajani, the eldest of Dr. Fouad's children, was also in attendance.
We never quarreled.
Oh, really?
We didn't talk politics. And we were such good friends, caring to each other.
It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome the Dajani family who came from all over the world to this special and unique occasion. اليوم سنخلد ذكرى ابن يافا البار الطبيب البارع الدكتور فؤاد إسماعيل الدجاني مؤسس مستشفى الدجاني، وذلك بإطلاق اسمه على الدوار المجاور للمستشفى، ليبقى هذا الاسم خالداً وليبقى اسم العائلة محفوراً في ذاكرتنا جميعاً.
We had a nice surprise when a Jewish ex-nurse who used to work at the hospital for my grandfather was introduced to the audience. She is now 93 years old.
I am the youngest and sole surviving son and one of the 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, of Dr. Fouad Dajani and Fay al-Husseini. It seemed that anyone who had come in contact or had been treated by him were quick to praise him not only as a great physician, but perhaps more importantly, as a great man. A man that showed his kindness and generosity by treating the poor and the needy without charge. So I finally want to thank all of you who are gathered here today to help us celebrate to what to me and my family is a great day in our life. And I hope that that can act as an example to the 2 peoples, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Ismail, and to whom God, according to Genesis, promised this land, that they themselves, like the healer that we are honoring, can heal the wounds of our differences and find a way to live together in peace and harmony in this holy land.
My trip to Palestine was quite simply a magical experience that I will never forget. In the 4 days I spent there, it became very clear to me as to why this tiny country on the Mediterranean coast has been the most sought after piece of land over the last 4 millennia. It was also a highly bittersweet experience. Bitter because of the injustice of it all, an acute sense of loss wherever you go, compounded by the ubiquitous signs of occupation, from the soldiers to the checkpoints, to the wall to the settlements. The nostalgia too was often painfully overbearing, as the mind continuously wandered back to how life must have been pre-1948. It was sweet, however, because I got to see this land that was the subject of so many beautiful stories during my childhood, a land that is truly biblical in every sense of the word. It was sweet because I was amongst my own people for the first time, a people who have been through so much, yet are so resilient. It was also sweet because I finally got to walk on the very same soil that my ancestors have walked on for the last 8 centuries. But above all, it was sweet because I finally found home.